You think your wedding day is the end of a fairy tale? For me, it was the starting gun for a war. What happens when your perfect wedding is just the stage for a perfect betrayal? When I do is just the prelude to I'm done with you. This isn't a love story. This is a balance sheet, and I am here to collect every single cent. My name is Alara, and I am 32 years old. From my seat at the head table, the grand ballroom of the Copley Plaza looked perfect. Historic Boston, dripping in ivory roses and muted gold. The string quartet played softly, the sound muffled by the expensive murmur of 300 guests. I was a bride. I was also, according to the seating chart, the guest of honor. But I felt like a necessary piece of decoration, rigid and breathless, my ribs aching against the boning of the gown. Across the room, my new husband, Julian Thorne, moved like a shark in Charisma's clothing. He was handsome, ridiculously so, with that easy charm that made investors open their wallets and women overlook his ambition. He wasn't a husband, he was a politician on the campaign trail, shaking hands, laughing at jokes he didn't hear, his eyes scanning the room for the next opportunity. Every glance was a transaction. My gaze shifted to my father, Arthur Blackwell. He sat 2 seats down, a statue of cold approval. As the CEO of Blackwell Health Dynamics, Arthur didn't watch events, he assessed outcomes. He observed the room with the quiet satisfaction of a general whose battle plan was unfolding precisely as intended. He caught my eye and nodded once, a gesture that meant proceeding as scheduled. And then there was Maya, my sister, the family diamond. She was lounging at her table, draped in a crimson dress so low-cut it was practically a dare. She was effortlessly magnetic, the kind of woman who soaked up all the oxygen in a room just by existing. I saw her glance toward Julian, who was charming an elderly board member, and her mouth curved in a faint, unmistakable expression of boredom. A tightness, sharp and specific, had been coiling in my stomach all day. I'd dismissed it as nerves. Wedding jitters. I told myself, this is normal. But it wasn't the normal flutter of excitement. It was the icy dread of a data set that won't reconcile. I am a data analyst. I find patterns in chaos. And the pattern tonight felt wrong, skewed, forced. I knew what this was. This celebration wasn't a marriage. It was a merger. Julian, brilliant and ruthless, was the new senior vice president at Blackwell Health Dynamics. This wedding was the final clause, the signature that cemented his loyalty and secured his position. I heard my father's voice from 3 months ago, the words delivered with the same chill as his boardroom directives. Ilara, Julian needs stability. You are stability. Don't complicate things. I was the stabilizing element in his equation, the reliable, underestimated, quiet daughter, the ballast. The lights dimmed further, the quartet faded, replaced by the amplified sound of a microphone being tapped. The moment had arrived. The first dance. Julian strode to the center of the dance floor, bathed in a soft spotlight. He picked up the microphone, his smile dazzling the room into silence. He looked toward the head table. I felt the automatic pull to stand, the fabric of my dress rustling. He looked right at me, but his gaze didn't stop. It just slid past. Julian's smile was blinding, a perfectly calibrated display of joy for the cameras. He raised the microphone, and the remaining chatter died instantly. He let the silence hang, a showman milking the pause. "This dance," he began, his voice smooth and deep, resonating through the ballroom, "is for the woman I've loved for 10 years. The words hit me. 10 years. We had only known each other for 2. I was halfway out of my seat, my muscles tensing in confusion. My mind raced, trying to find the logic. Was this a joke? A misremembered timeline? My smile felt glued on, a painful rictus. I thought this was the start of some elaborate, romantic speech directed at me. Then he moved. Julian walked straight past me. He didn't even glance in my direction. The air he displaced carried the sharp, expensive scent of his cologne, a blend of cedar and bergamot I had bought him last Christmas. It washed over me like a cold wave. He didn't stop until he reached Maya's table. He stood before her, and my sister, my beautiful, bored sister, looked up at him. She was not surprised. She was not shocked. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face, a look of pure, venomous victory. He held out his hand. Maya took it, the crimson of her dress a slash against the white and gold of the room. He pulled her to her feet and led her onto the polished dance floor, into the center of the spotlight that was meant for me. The orchestra fumbled. I heard the confused scrape of a violin, a discordant note held too long. Then, after a painful second of silence, they recovered and slid into a slow, sweeping love ballad. A true, deafening silence fell over the guests. It was the vacuum left by a sudden, collective intake of breath. The whispers started immediately, a sibilant hiss that spread from table to table. I could feel 300 pairs of eyes on me, then on them, then back to me. The humiliation was a physical thing, a heavy cloak pressing down on my bare shoulders. But then the twist came, the final, brutal turn of the knife. Someone started to clap. It was hesitant at first, then gained confidence. Then another person joined, and another. Within seconds, the ballroom was filled with polite, then enthusiastic applause. I saw Mrs. Vanderbilt, a key board member, dabbing her eye. "How modern," she murmured to her husband, loud enough to be heard. What a sweet, inclusive gesture. Such a close-knit family. I stood frozen, a statue in a $30,000 gown. My gaze snapped to my father. Surely he would stop this. Surely this was not part of the plan. Arthur Blackwell was clapping. He wasn't just clapping, he was beaming. He nodded his head in time with the music, his eyes fixed on Julian and Maya as they swayed together, a look of profound, calculated approval on his face. He looked like a man who had just closed a very difficult, very profitable deal. The room, the music, the polite applause, it all dissolved into a dull, roaring sound in my ears. I was not betrayed by my husband. I was betrayed by my father. I was betrayed by my sister. I was not the bride. I was the collateral. I was the price of the merger, the stability element to be used and discarded. The fragile, hopeful part of me that had dressed this morning, the part that believed in the stability I represented, simply fractured. It broke apart, and the pieces didn't scatter. They settled, reforming into something cold, hard, and incredibly sharp. The Alara who always did as she was told, the daughter who never complicated things, died right there on the parquet floor. My obedience was over. I did not cry. I did not scream. The part of me that could do either of those things was gone, replaced by a cold, glittering clarity. I was an equation that had finally been solved. My hand was perfectly steady as I reached for my champagne flute. I lifted it, the bubbles rising undisturbed. Then I stood, the heavy silk of my wedding dress, a gown chosen for its virginal modesty, rustled around me. I turned away from the spectacle on the dance floor and walked toward the head table. The orchestra, still playing their sentimental ballad, began to falter. The eyes of the guests, which had been fixed on the romantic couple, now followed me. I was the bride, after all. I was the one making a move. I could feel the curiosity shift to confusion. Julian and Maya were still wrapped in each other's arms, lost in their public display. They didn't notice me. They didn't notice the music growing thin. I stopped directly in front of my father. Arthur Blackwell looked up at me, his eyes cold. He was not concerned. He was annoyed. His expression was the one he used in board meetings when an underling questioned his projections. He looked at me as if I were a disruption, an inconvenient variable he was about to dismiss. I took one, deep, steadying breath. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I pitched it to Carrie, to slice through the last fading notes of the orchestra. The violin scraped to a halt. The room was utterly still. "Father," I said. My voice was clear and calm, the voice of a data analyst presenting her findings. "Since Julian just publicly declared his love for Maya, does that mean I can take back full ownership of Project Chimera?" I let the question hang in the air for a beat, letting the names and the implications settle. Then I added the conclusion. "Or do you still need me as collateral to keep him in the company?" The silence that followed was not mere quiet. It was a void, a total cessation of sound and breath. Project Chimera, my secret, my child. The revolutionary medical predictive AI algorithm I had built from scratch over the last 6 years. It was my mind, codified. It was the true engine inside Blackwell Health Dynamics. And it was worth, conservatively, billions of dollars. On the dance floor, Julian and Maya broke apart. They stared at me, their faces frozen in disbelief. My father's mask of genial approval shattered. His jaw went slack. The heavy silver fork he was holding slipped from his fingers. It struck the edge of his porcelain plate with a sharp crack that echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Maya. Beautiful, triumphant Maya. The color drained from her face, leaving a sickly, greenish-pale canvas. Her crimson-painted mouth opened, but no sound came out. She put a hand to her throat, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. She gasped, her voice a reedy whisper. I need air." She stumbled backward, tripping on the hem of her own dress. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed in a heap of red silk on the dance floor. The ballroom erupted. The moment Maya hit the floor, the carefully constructed fantasy shattered into chaos. People surged forward, chairs scraped and fell, a glass broke. I heard someone shout, "Is she breathing?" Another yelled, "Get a doctor. Is there a doctor in the house?" Julian, his face a mask of genuine terror, scrambled across the dance floor to her. Maya, wake up." His voice was high, cracking with a panic that was not faked. My father, however, did not move toward Maya. He moved toward me. Arthur Blackwell launched himself from his chair. His civilized mask was gone, replaced by a dark, mottled purple rage. The veins stood out on his neck. He seized my upper arm, his fingers digging like claws through the delicate lace, bruising the skin underneath. His grip was iron. "What have you done?" he hissed. His voice a low, violent roar meant only for me, though half the table flinched. "You stupid, stupid fool. You've ruined everything." He wasn't looking at his collapsed daughter. He was looking at his investors, who were watching this meltdown with wide, horrified eyes. He was worried about Project Chimera. He shoved me, hard. I stumbled backward, crashing into an abandoned guest table. Champagne spilled, soaking the white silk of my skirt. He didn't give me a second glance. He turned his back on me, his posture straightening as he resumed command. "Call an ambulance," he bellowed to the room at large, the CEO managing the crisis. He strode past me, following the paramedics who were now rushing in, leaving with them, with Julian, with Maya. I was left standing alone in the wreckage of my own wedding reception. The music was gone. The room was a mess of panicked whispers and overturned chairs. The guests who remained, the ones not rushing to the door, stared at me. Their faces held no sympathy. I saw the judgment, the morbid curiosity, the open contempt for the woman who had ruined such a perfect party. I was the crazy one. I was the disruption. I turned and walked away. I walked out of the ballroom, my veil trailing behind me like a shroud. I crossed the opulent hotel lobby. The concierge stared blankly, too professional to react to a bride leaving her own reception alone, her dress stained with champagne. I stepped out onto the cold Boston sidewalk. The night air hit my bare shoulders. I had nothing. My purse, my wallet, my car keys all were in the bridal suite. I now realized I would never see. All I had was my phone, tucked into the hidden pocket my dressmaker had insisted on. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady when I called the taxi. I gave the driver the address of the new penthouse on the waterfront, the wedding gift, our home. The drive was silent. The city lights blurred past the window. When we arrived, I paid with the app and walked into the gleaming, empty marble lobby. I took the private elevator up to the penthouse floor. The doors opened onto a small, private foyer. I reached into the small satin pouch tied to my wrist and pulled out the slim, heavy key card. I held it against the sensor. The light flashed red. Access denied. I tried it again, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm. Red. Access denied. The locks had been changed. They had anticipated this. My phone vibrated in my hand. A bright, cheerful chime. It was a notification from my bank. Alert, your joint account with Julian Thorne has been frozen. I stared at the words. Frozen. Not just blocked. Frozen. This was systematic. My breath hitched. The screen lit up again. Another notification. This one was an email. The sender was HR Services, Blackwell Health Dynamics. The subject line was 2 words. Immediate termination. My fingers trembled as I opened it. It was a standard, brutal corporate template. Dear Ms. Blackwell, it began, not Ms. Thorne. This email serves as official notification of the immediate termination of your employment, due to a gross violation of your non-disclosure agreement and a critical breach of company confidentiality clauses regarding proprietary intellectual property. They were firing me for mentioning Chimera, my project. I stood in the sterile hallway, 50 floors above the city, in a soaking wet wedding dress, banned from my home, penniless, my accounts seized, jobless. It had been less than 1 hour since I said, I do. The elevator doors closed, sealing me in the silent, sterile hallway. I stepped back out into the lobby, past the same doorman who now avoided my gaze, and pushed through the heavy glass doors. The first drop of rain hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, then another. Within minutes, a cold October downpour was sluicing from the sky, turning the city streets into black mirrors. I started walking, with no destination other than away. People stared. A bride, alone, after midnight, her $30,000 dress soaked and dragging on the grime of the pavement, her veil plastered to her back. They saw a tragedy, a jilted lover, a drunken mistake. They saw everything except the truth. I had no money. I had no home. My phone, my only connection, was now just a ticking clock until its battery died. There was only one place left to go, one door in all of Boston that might open for me. It was a long walk. My feet were bleeding inside the delicate satin heels long before I reached the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill. I stopped in front of a narrow, dark brick townhouse, ivy clinging to its face, the windows dark save for a single light in an upper room. This was the house my father had forbidden me from ever visiting. This was Aunt Clara's house, my father's older sister, the family pariah. She had been cast out 20 years ago, erased from the Blackwell Christmas card list for her erratic moods and paranoid accusations against Arthur. My hand was so cold I could barely make a fist. I knocked, the sound echoing weakly against the heavy wood. For a long moment, nothing. Then, a deadbolt scraped back. The door opened a crack, revealing a sliver of a woman with a wild mane of silver hair and eyes as sharp and clear as chipped ice. Clara looked at me, taking in the ruined dress, the streaming mascara, the shivering. She showed no shock, no pity. I wondered when one of Arthur's children would finally wake up, she said, her voice dry as paper. Get in. She pulled me inside, bolting the door behind me. The house was warm and smelled of old books and dried herbs. She disappeared, returning a moment later with a thick, worn bathrobe and a steaming mug of tea. "The dress comes off," she ordered. "You'll die of pneumonia, and Arthur will call it another unfortunate family tragedy." I changed, my fingers fumbling with the hundreds of tiny buttons. I sat in her kitchen, wrapped in flannel, and as I drank the scalding tea, the story poured out of me. The dress, the speech, the dance, Maya's collapse, the question, the locked penthouse, the frozen account, the termination. Clara just listened, her sharp eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she let out a short, bark-like laugh. "You think this is about Julian and Maya?" she said, shaking her head. "Oh, Alara. You always were the smart one, which made your blindness so astonishing." She sat across from me. "Your mother, Eleanor, she didn't die of a simple heart attack 10 years ago. She wasn't sick. She was learning. She found something." "What did she find?" I whispered. "She left this for you," Clara said, ignoring my question. She went to a small writing desk and returned with an old, ornate key to a safe deposit box. It was heavy in my hand. "She gave it to me the week before she died," she said. "Give this to Alara, and only Alara. Give it to her when Arthur finally destroys her. He will, eventually. He destroys everything beautiful." My head was spinning. "Clara, I don't understand." "The speech," Clara said, leaning in, her voice dropping. "Julian's 10 years of love. You think that was for Maya?" She scoffed. "Julian doesn't love Maya. He loves himself. Julian Thorne loves survival." She stood and looked out the rain-streaked window. 10 years ago, right after your mother's funeral, your father flew to Las Vegas. He met a very desperate, very charming young tech executive who had managed to gamble away nearly $1 million he didn't have. Arthur paid the debt. In full. In cash. The tea mug slipped in my hand. "Julian has belonged to your father long before he ever met you." "Alara," Clara said, turning back to me, her eyes pinning me in place. "He was an acquisition. The 10 years of love. It wasn't a declaration of romance for my sister. It was a statement of service to my father." The next morning, I woke to the smell of strong coffee and the sharp realization that my life was in ruins. Clara, already dressed, handed me a pair of jeans and a thick sweater. They were decades old but clean. We didn't talk. We took a taxi, paid for with Clara's cash, to an old granite-faced bank downtown, the kind of institution built on old money and older secrets. Clara presented the key and a forged signature card Eleanor had apparently prepared years ago. The manager, an elderly man who seemed carved from the same granite as the building, led us down into the vault. The air was cold and still. He retrieved the box, a long, heavy steel container, and left us alone in a private, wood-paneled room. It contained no jewels, no bonds, no stacks of cash. It was far more valuable. Inside, nestled in aged velvet, were 5 industrial-grade, encrypted hard drives and a single slim, leather-bound notebook. My mother's weapons. We returned to Beacon Hill. Clara's attic was not the dusty, cobweb-filled space I'd imagined. It was a command center. The walls were lined with foil-backed insulation, creating a makeshift Faraday cage. "Blocks any signal, in or out," Clara explained. Arthur always hated my paranoia. In the center sat a high-end, air-gapped computer terminal, completely disconnected from the internet. This was my territory. My hands, which had trembled as I held the teacup, were now steady. I booted the system and plugged in the first drive. The encryption was military-grade, but it was a logic I understood. It was a fortress built of code, and I knew how to find the cracks. I set the first decryption algorithm to run. It would take hours, maybe days. While the machine worked, I opened the notebook. It was my mother's handwriting, precise, analytical, familiar. It wasn't a diary. It was a research log. It was filled with her private notes on clinical trials at Blackwell Health Dynamics. I saw a specific drug code, HT14, then the words, circled, again and again. Anomaly, cardiac stress markers, results suppressed, data set incomplete, danger. My mother hadn't just suspected. She knew. She had been investigating the company, investigating my father, long before her simple heart attack. I needed the original datasets she was referring to. They wouldn't be on the drives. These drives were her private storage. The raw data would be on the Blackwell servers. I was locked out, but I knew someone who wasn't. Mark, the head lab director, a brilliant, anxious man who valued data integrity above all else. I left the attic, the first drive still churning, and found a public payphone 3 blocks away. I dialed his private cell number from memory. He picked up on the 5th ring, his voice breathless. Ilara, my God, is what they're saying. True, the whole office is in chaos. Mark, listen to me, I said, my voice low. I'm not crazy, and I'm not a thief. I need you to pull the raw data logs for HT14, the trials from 10 years ago. Silence. I could hear him breathing. I can't, he whispered. Ilara, I can't do that. You remember that data. Mark. We both looked at it. We both knew it was skewed. You said it yourself. He was terrified. He finally agreed to meet, but not at his office, not at his home. The Museum of Science, he said, his voice tight with panic. The electricity exhibit, 1 hour, and then never again. I found him standing near the giant Van de Graaff generator, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, flinching every time the artificial lightning cracked. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Mark, the old trials. I started. I can't. He cut me off, refusing to meet my eyes. Ilara, I'm sorry. They gave it to me. Gave you what? He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a miserable combination of shame and fear. Your job. They called me Monday morning. I got your promotion. I'm sitting in your office. Ilara, I have your clearance. The air left my lungs. They hadn't just fired me. They had replaced me, instantly, with someone they knew was compliant. And, he said, taking a step back as if I were contagious, they know you're asking. The second I logged in this morning, a red flag from corporate security popped up. Your name. Project Chimera. And HT14. My terminal was flagged just for having this conversation. They're watching. Ilara. They're watching everything. He turned and walked away, disappearing into a crowd of tourists, leaving me alone with the static hum of the exhibit. I walked back to Clara's. It was over. I couldn't get help from the inside. Everyone at Blackwell Health Dynamics was either bought, like Mark, or too terrified to even look at my name. I climbed the stairs back to the attic. The decryption program was still running. I stared at the progress bar. I was locked out. I was a digital ghost. I didn't just need an analyst anymore. I needed someone who wasn't afraid to burn the whole building down. I needed an outsider, someone who had nothing left to lose. I walked back into the attic, the air stale with the hum of the computers. Mark is a dead end, I announced. He's been bought. They gave him my job. Clara just nodded, sipping her morning coffee. Of course they did. Arthur collects people. He finds their price. Mark's was ambition. Julian's was debt. What's yours? Ilara. Or rather, what was it? Stability, I whispered. Exactly. You were the cheapest of them all. You can't fight him from the inside. Child, the inside belongs to him. You need someone he already threw away. Someone with nothing left to lose. She paused, looking at a fixed point on the wall. Do you remember the name Miles Corbin? The name was familiar, like a story I'd half heard. The journalist from the Globe. He was an investigative reporter. He went after Blackwell Health Dynamics about data privacy. 5 years ago, Clara said, her voice sharp. It was a minor breach, barely a footnote. But Arthur doesn't tolerate scrutiny. He didn't sue the paper. He sued Miles, personally, for defamation. He bankrupted him, bled him dry in the courts, and had him blacklisted from every reputable paper in the country. He destroyed him. Where is he? In the gutter. Exactly where Arthur intended him to be. It took 2 hours and a burner phone to track him down. He wasn't at the Globe. He was running a small, angry tech blog from a post office box in Somerville. The address attached to the domain registration was for a unit above a pizza shop. The smell of stale beer and pepperoni hit me as I climbed the narrow, greasy stairs. The door was marked Suite B, but the glass was cracked. I knocked. A voice yelled, "It's open, unless you're the landlord." The office was a single, cramped room, suffocatingly hot from the whirring fans of at least 10 aging computer towers. Miles Corbin looked older than his pictures, thin, with a 3-day beard and the kind of eyes that had seen too many late nights and too many betrayals. He was staring at a wall of code. "I'm not the landlord," I said. He spun around in his chair. He looked at my face, and a slow, tired recognition dawned. Then he laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Well, I'll be damned." Alara Blackwell, the princess herself. "What's the matter? Did Daddy send you to finish the job? Plant a virus or just buy my silence for good?" He turned back to his screen. "I'm not for sale and I'm not worth the trouble. Get out." I walked forward, unzipping the backpack Clara had given me. I placed the first hard drive on his desk, next to an empty coffee mug. "I'm not here to buy you, Mr. Corbin. I'm here to hire you." He glanced at the drive. "I don't do data recovery for rich kids." "My father, my sister, and my new husband publicly humiliated and disowned me at my wedding reception 2 days ago. I've been fired from my own project. My assets are frozen, and I'm locked out of my home. This," I tapped the drive, "is one of 5 my mother left me. It's her private research. It's why she really died. I've broken the outer encryption, but the final layer is a biometric trap. I need someone who can crack it without wiping it, and who knows how to publish what's inside." He was still staring at the drive. He didn't move for a full minute. Then, very slowly, he turned his chair to face me. The exhaustion in his eyes was still there, but it was now competing with a different kind of light, a dangerous, hungry light. "You're Arthur Blackwell's daughter," he said quietly, "and you want to burn him to the ground." "I want the truth," I said. "The rest is just data." He looked at me, then at the drive. "The rent's due," he said. "Pull up a chair. This is probably going to take a while." We worked for nearly 2 days, fueled by bad coffee and the angry energy of revenge. He was a brute force artist, and I was a surgeon. He attacked the firewalls, and I navigated the logic traps my mother had laid. On the second night, the final partition unlocked, the screen filled with directories, and we saw it, the truth. It wasn't just corporate fraud. It was systematic, cold-blooded murder. My father's company, Blackwell Health Dynamics, was on the verge of releasing HT14, a new, revolutionary heart medication. My algorithm, Project Chimera, was designed to analyze the final phase clinical trial data to predict its success and identify potential risks. "This is the data they gave me," I explained to Miles, opening a file on his terminal. "The data I used to build Chimera's primary model. It's perfect. It shows a 99.9% success rate. And this," Miles said, his voice grim, "is the file from your mother's drive. The real data. The raw trial logs." I ran a differential. The room went cold. My mother's data showed the drug worked, but in a small but devastating percentage of patients with a specific genetic marker. It caused sudden, fatal cardiac arrest. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew it was killing people." "He didn't just know." "Ilara," Miles said, his fingers flying across the keyboard, opening another hidden folder. "He and Julian used you to hide it. Look at this." He opened a file. It was a secondary project, one I had been assigned, one I thought was just a theoretical exercise. They had given me a hypothetical data set and asked me to build a model that could cleanse it of statistical outliers. They had tricked me. I had, unknowingly, built the very tool they needed to erase the deaths. They used your fake algorithm, Miles said, his voice flat with disgust. To scrub the fatalities from the official record, they created a perfectly clean, perfectly fraudulent set of data, submitted that to the FDA, and they are preparing to take this drug global. The launch event is tomorrow. We've got a problem, Miles said, his voice grim. He threw a folded newspaper onto the desk. It wasn't some local rag. It was the front page of the Boston Globe. My father had launched his counter-assault. He hadn't just realized I was digging, he had anticipated it, and he had struck first, carpet-bombing my entire life. The headline was a masterpiece of character assassination. Broken heart or toxic vengeance. Blackwell heiress fired after attempted extortion of family. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The article was a systematic demolition of my sanity, my reputation, and my entire professional career. It quoted numerous sources close to the family, which meant my father's legal and PR teams. They painted a picture of me as emotionally unstable, a brilliant but deeply troubled woman. They claimed I was pathologically jealous of my sister's happiness and had become fixated on Julian Thorne. The narrative they spun was grotesque. I had made inappropriate advances, been gently rebuffed, and in a fit of spurned rage, I had tried to extort the company by falsely claiming ownership of Project Chimera, my life's work. They called it a delusional fantasy of ownership over what was clearly company property. The most brutal part was the interview with Maya. There was a large photograph accompanying the article, showing her weeping delicately into a handkerchief, her face a mask of sisterly concern. "I've always admired Alara," she was quoted as saying, her words dripping with false sorrow. "She's so brilliant, but we've been worried about her for some time, her instability. It's just gotten worse. We tried to get her help, but she refused. I'm frightened of what she'll do next." I was no longer a person. I was a problem to be managed. I was the crazy ex-girlfriend, the unstable sister, the disgruntled, thieving employee. They had taken my truth, the betrayal, the public humiliation, and twisted it into a weapon to be used against me. My professional standing was not just damaged, it was incinerated. "He's controlling the narrative," Miles said, pacing the small, hot office, his hands balled into fists. "He owns the board of that paper. This is a PR blitz. He's defined you before you can define him. Anything we release now, all this data, it's not evidence. It's proof of your vendetta. It's the ramblings of a crazy woman trying to get back at her family. We're done. He won. He was right. We had the facts. But my father owned the story. The truth didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the narrative he was selling, and he was selling it on the front page. I kept staring at the photograph, Maya's face, crumpled in that perfect photogenic grief. She was dabbing at her left eye, her right hand holding the handkerchief, and on her right wrist, clearly visible, was a flash of silver and dark, veined turquoise. My breath stopped. I leaned in, my eyes tracing the familiar pattern. It was a one-of-a-kind Navajo cuff, heavy and intricate. My mother, Eleanor, had worn it every single day of her life. It was her signature, as much a part of her as her laugh. I had asked for it after the funeral, but my father had told me it was lost. He had said, his voice thick with false sentiment, that in the chaos of the paramedics, it must have disappeared at the hospital, but it wasn't lost. It was right there, on Maya's wrist. The implications hit me, one after another, like blows to the chest. Maya, who had been there. Maya, who had been weeping over her mother's sudden death. Maya, who was now weeping over her sister's instability. She had taken it. She had taken a trophy from our mother's body. Miles, I said, my voice barely a whisper, pointing at the picture. This wasn't a cover-up. He stopped pacing. What are you talking about? This, I said, my finger tapping the bracelet. This bracelet. My mother was wearing it when she died. The room went silent. The hum of the servers seemed to fade. I looked up from the picture, the smear campaign forgotten, replaced by a cold, dark certainty that went far beyond corporate fraud. This, I said, the words forming in my throat, was a murder. I ran down the attic stairs, my feet pounding on the old wood. Clara was in the kitchen, washing her coffee mug. She looked up as I burst in, the newspaper clutched in my hand. Clara, I said, my voice hoarse. I couldn't get the words out. I just pointed to the picture of Maya. The bracelet. Do you remember this bracelet? Clara dried her hands on a dish towel and took the paper from me. She squinted at the grainy image. Her face, already pale, turned a chalky, bloodless white. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered, sinking onto a kitchen stool. It can't be. It is, isn't it? Eleanor was buried in it, she said, her voice trembling. Or she was supposed to be. I helped pick out the coffin. I asked Arthur about it, about the bracelet. He said it was lost at the hospital, that the paramedics must have taken it off. He said it was gone. The air in the kitchen was thick and cold. We stared at each other. This was no longer about data fraud. This wasn't about a corporate cover-up. This was something darker, something rooted in the very moment my mother died. I ran back upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. Miles was exactly where I'd left him, slumped in his chair, staring bleakly at the front-page article on his own monitor. It's not fraud, Miles, I said, breathless. It's murder. He looked at me like I'd finally snapped, just as the article said. Ilara, don't. That's what they want. They want you to sound crazy. She's wearing my mother's bracelet, I said, pointing to my own screen. The one she was wearing when she died. The one that disappeared at the hospital. Miles stopped. He leaned in, staring at the image. So she's a ghoul. She stole jewelry from her dead mother. It's sick, but it's not murder. No, I said, my mind racing, connecting the data points. My mother didn't just find the bad data. She was investigating it. She was building a case. And she died of a sudden heart attack. The very thing HT-14 causes. I turned back to the terminal, to the directory of my mother's encrypted drives. There has to be more, something we missed. I scanned the file lists again, past the trial data, past her research notes, and I saw it. A single, small audio file, its extension one I didn't recognize. It was locked with a separate, final layer of encryption, a password prompt. I missed this, I whispered. It wasn't in the data folders. It was in the root directory. It's an audio file. It's probably corrupted. Or trapped, Miles said, leaning over my shoulder. What's the password? I looked at the prompt. It wasn't a question. It was just a blank field. My mother's mind. What would she use? Not her birthday. Not my father's. Not mine. I thought back to my childhood, to the things that were just ours, before the company, before the betrayal. I typed in a name, Barnaby, 1995, the birth year of my first dog, a scruffy golden retriever I had loved more than anything. The file unlocked. Miles hit play. The file was raw, unedited, the sound of a room, a voice, my mother's, weak, but sharp. Cannot let you do this. Julian, you are knowingly putting poison on the market. My blood froze. Another voice, younger, sharper. Maya. Mother, you're being dramatic. It's a few outliers. Father explained it. It's just the cost of business. Business. Eleanor's voice rose, stronger now. We are a health company. We are not. Then, Julian's voice. the same smooth, confident voice that had charmed me, that had stood at the altar, but this voice was cold, flat. "Eleanor, you need to calm down. Arthur has this under control. You're upset. You're not thinking clearly." "I am thinking perfectly clearly," my mother snapped. "I know he bought you. I know about the Las Vegas debt. I know you are a fraud, and I am going to expose you both." There was a scuffle, a chair scraping. My mother's voice, suddenly terrified. "What are you doing? That's my medicine. Get away from my—" A thud, a gasp, a heavy, choked sound. Then silence for a few terrible seconds. A new sound. Maya, sobbing, but not in grief, in panic. "Julian, she's not breathing. Oh my God, Julian, she's not breathing. You said it would just make her sleep. You said it would just make her sleep." And finally, Julian's voice, stripped of all charm, metallic and hard as a gun. "Shut up. Stop crying. Call Arthur. Now. Tell him she's having a heart attack. Tell him it was sudden." The recording ended. It was murder. They had switched her medication. They had watched her die. And Maya, my sister, had stood there and taken the bracelet from our mother's cooling wrist. The Boston Convention Center was flooded with blue light and the low, self-satisfied hum of corporate power. This was not a launch. It was a coronation. Hundreds of investors, analysts, FDA officials, and international press had gathered for the unveiling of HT14, the miracle drug that would, according to the massive banners, heal the heart of the world. My father was on stage, bathed in a warm spotlight, a masterful performance of a humble visionary. He was speaking about a legacy of trust, about his late, beloved wife, Eleanor, and her dream of a healthier future. In the front row, Julian and Maya sat side by side, glowing. They were the picture of a bright, stable future, the new power behind the Blackwell throne. Maya was even wearing the turquoise bracelet. She was flaunting it. I slipped in through a side entrance, using the shareholder's pass Clara had kept for 20 years. I wore a simple black dress, my hair pulled back. I was no longer a bride. I was a data point seeking an answer. Miles was already in place, patched into the press box, his laptop hardwired directly into the room's audio-visual mainframe. He was ready. I began to walk. I started at the back of the auditorium and walked slowly, steadily, down the center aisle, directly toward the stage. A few people turned to look, annoyed at the interruption, then dismissed me as a late-arriving assistant. But as I got closer to the front, a security guard in a black suit noticed me. He moved to intercept, his hand up. "Ma'am, you can't be—" A journalist in the aisle, smelling a disruption, shoved a microphone toward me. "Are you with the protest?" he whispered, thinking I was one of the anti-pharma people outside. I took the microphone from his hand. "I just have a question for my sister," I said. My voice, amplified, boomed through the hall. The security guard froze. My father stopped mid-sentence, his word trust hanging in the air. Silence. Every eye in the room was on me. I looked past my father, past Julian, and directly at Maya in the front row. She was staring at me, her face pale. "Maya," I said, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly clear, echoing in the vast space. "That's a beautiful bracelet. It's so unique. Is that the same one our mother was wearing when you and Julian swapped her medication?" The color drained from Maya's face. Her mouth opened, a small, ugly O of terror. She didn't faint. She just broke. Julian leaped to his feet. His polished mask was gone, replaced by raw, cornered animal panic. "She's crazy!" he screamed, pointing at me. "She's unstable, I told you. Security grab her, get her out of here." He was shouting, his voice cracking, destroying the event's perfect calm. He was giving orders, and that was his mistake. My father, on the stage, watched the man he owned trying to take command. Arthur Blackwell's face contorted in a purple, imperial rage, not at me, but at his insubordinate soldier. He forgot the audience. He forgot the investors. He forgot everything but his own power. He gripped his lectern microphone and bellowed, his voice overriding Julian's. "Julian, shut up. You're just a soldier. I've been covering this up for 10 years. It was the confession the entire world needed to hear, and in the single, perfect second of silence that followed Arthur's roar, Miles hit play. My mother's voice filled the auditorium, weak, terrified. "What are you doing? That's my medicine." Then Julian's, cold. "Eleanor, you need to calm down." And then Maya's, the sound of pure panic, echoing off every wall, vibrating in every wine glass. "Julian, she's not breathing. Oh my God, Julian, she's not breathing. You said it would just make her sleep. You said it would just make her sleep." The room exploded. It was absolute primal chaos. Maya finally collapsed, slumping to the floor in a heap. Julian, his face white, turned and tried to bolt, running for a side exit. Arthur stood frozen on the stage, a statue of his own hubris, finally understanding what he had done. The side doors he was running toward burst open, but it wasn't the exit. It was the police. And behind them, the FBI. Miles had sent the recording to the authorities 10 minutes before I even stepped into the room. They swarmed in, moving past the screaming investors and panicked press. They caught Julian before he took 3 steps. They cuffed Maya as she lay on the floor, sobbing. 2 agents walked calmly onto the stage and placed their hands on Arthur Blackwell, who didn't even resist. They were arrested on the spot, for fraud, for conspiracy, and for the murder of Eleanor Blackwell. I stood in the center aisle as the storm I had unleashed raged around me. I felt the weight of my mother's safe deposit key in my pocket, its metal cold and final. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I'd love to connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.